Hi, hello, Mr. Wigan. This is a pleasure to see you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure to present Mr. Gúnar Wigan, who is currently a visiting professor at the International Relations and Diplomacy Department of College of Europe in Bruges, and also a visiting distinguished fellow at the Indo-Pacific program of the German Marshall Fund Brussels office. But we all know him from his work in the External Action Service, where he was the managing director for Asia and the Pacific for 7 years, if I'm not mistaken. And then before that, from 2011, he was the director for Russia, Eastern Partnership, Central Asia, and OSCE. And before the director for Eastern Europe, Southern Caucasus, and Central Asia at the European Commission, the DG Relex. And I think that's the time when we got to know each other, quite a long time ago, if I'm not mistaken, about 15 years ago or so. And Mr. Wigan was the chief negotiator for the association agreements with Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia, and also the agreements with Kazakhstan. So his knowledge of this region is quite profound, I would say, but also his recent work has been with Asia, basically. And so he's also, I would say, one of the prominent experts in that field as well. Once again, good morning. It's good to see you, Mr. Wigan. So briefly about us, this is the German Center of Excellence, EUPOLTRANS, the first German Center of Excellence in the Caucasus, hosted by the Caucasus University at Tbilisi. And this is the part of the expert interview series where we get in touch with certain experts in different fields related to EU, to foreign policy, security policy, different policies of the EU, and kind of pick their brains for a while about some of the important issues. Welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Happy to be with you. And I would like to add that when I was the chief negotiator for the association agreement, there was, of course, a key part of these negotiations where you were the counterpart on the other side.
That is correct. Yeah, and those were good old times. But actually, let's start with that. So a long time has passed since then, and a lot has changed in the approach of the European Union. At that time, we were only beginning the kind of Eastern Partnership. European neighborhood policy was kind of the key word. Today, we're talking about the accession process. The Commission just published the 2023 enlargement package, and basically starting accession talks with Ukraine, Moldova. They have recommended to grant the candidate status to Georgia. So the question is, how realistic is the EU about the enlargement? Is it just because of the Ukraine kind of opened window of opportunity, or do you think it's really a kind of that the countries and the institutions are really serious about?
Well, the Russian aggression against Ukraine has certainly fundamentally altered the geopolitical needs which we have in Europe for lasting stability. And there are answers which are found in the context of territorial defense by NATO, and there are answers which have to be found in the much closer relationship between the EU and partners, whether these are in the Balkans or whether they are in Eastern Europe. And there is certainly a different realization of the necessity to create a stable Europe with clarity of choices and with a required support in all areas, and the perspectives for all citizens, which are not just visionary perspectives, but concrete perspectives, even if reforms take time. But this is all embedded in the wider geopolitical consideration that a gray zone of intense rivalry would be not to the benefit of anyone, but stability and clarity which provide perspectives which are positive and stabilizing for everyone. And therefore, I would say there is a different realization of this now, definitely, than in the years where we were negotiating the association agreement, even though I'm very glad that the association agreement is in place, because it has led to significant approximation in many key areas to EU standards, which will make the enlargement process easier than otherwise, than what we had with other partners beforehand. So I would say there's definitely a change of consciousness of the stakes and of the needs to engage comprehensively. But nothing is easy and nothing is fast. And we of course, there's the hope here in Brussels that our leaders will decide on what you just said. It's not yet decided, that there would be actually a start of the accession negotiation process with Ukraine and Moldova, and that Georgia would be granted the candidate status, which will allow eventually the start of accession negotiations also in the case of Georgia, when the key 12 points will be fulfilled before this is possible. But
that does mean that the attitudes have changed, right? In the capitals and in Brussels. In other words, look, I remember after 2008 war, Russia's invasion of Georgia, the approach of the European Union was, let's launch the Eastern Partnership with kind of concrete mechanisms in place, association agreement, DCFTA, visa liberalization. It was in a way the response to, in a way, I'm not saying it was a direct response, but in a way a response to this Russia's aggressive kind of actions in the neighborhood. And now after the invasion of Ukraine, EU has kind of gone a bit further, saying that, okay, we're now gonna look at this region from the perspective of enlargement. So this has changed, right? So the geopolitical thinking of the European Union has changed towards, in other words, enlargement used to be a taboo. It's not a taboo anymore, right?
I think you are a sharp observer of the of these nuances, and they are indeed more than nuances. They are substantial differences, and we have here a change, yes, that we see now enlargement. Let's put it this way: there has been politically, I would say, you could call it an enlargement fatigue in our populations. And there has been the clear priority given to internal consolidation, and a number of different crises, from the Eurozone crisis to COVID, including the Brexit times, have not increased the desire to further enlarge. On the contrary, have increased the desire to stabilize internally, including with the huge recovery programs post-COVID. And the green and digital transition priorities. But citizens and our decision makers have become acutely more aware of the geopolitical risks which surround Europe, and the global environment in which this takes place. And therefore, there is a realization that the European Union will have to consolidate internally, but also externally, by not leaving the key elements of potential instability unaddressed, and by addressing it with the most consequential form which we have, which is to lead towards a permanent stabilization in economic, in political and societal terms through the enlargement process. So I would say there has been definitely an injection of new sincerity and of consequential thinking into the enlargement process. And one could have expected that this would be limited to those who are already candidates, to the Balkan countries. But it has not been limited to this. But yes, under the impact of the brutal war, under the impact of war having become another time an instrument of politics, there is the realization that we have to become serious about this also with our closest Eastern European neighbors, who have gone on the tough path of association and are ready to take the even tougher path of lasting reforms, which is linked to enlargement.
All right, thank you. Can you tell us a bit more about the different stances and approaches that different institutions take on this issue, on the enlargement. I'm going to get to the CFSP in a bit about the more global role of the EU, but the Council, the Member States, the Commission, the European Parliament, I mean, we understand that from the treaty perspective, they all have different roles and views on the enlargement process. But can you tell us in terms of how these roles have changed, how they have evolved in the last, I don't know, 20 years? Because I think you've been following this from the inside. You've been seeing how the EAS has been created, how the member states, in a way, could have gotten a bit stronger. But on the other hand, Commission is in the driving seat. The Parliament has obviously become a factor in this debate. Can you talk about this dynamics a bit in the last, under your watch, basically, how these roles of different institutions changed when shaping the enlargement decisions and the policies?
Well, when one reaches my age, then you can look back already at a considerable period of history evolving. I started at the European Commission as the last desk officer for the German Democratic Republic.
Oh,
that was it was fast renamed External Aspects of German Reunification. And of course, later on, we took on a number of new members from Central and Eastern Europe, which was directly linked to the same historic changes in the Soviet Union, in the Warsaw Pact, in the Comecon. And all this came just a few years after new democracies were admitted to the European Union, called Greece, Spain, and Portugal. So it is the domestic changes which are key drivers which allow enlargement to stable democracy, stable rule of law, and to a stable market economy. And this experience to make sure that that stability of that change towards such system is guaranteed, is the best driver of enlargement. So it is not only a geopolitical desire in Brussels or in the capitals of our member states, it must be matched by that consequential change of a system, of a society, and the capacity to drive through a European-based agenda. In terms of the institutions, basically the role is pretty clear. The Commission is making the proposal, and the Council takes the decision when it comes to the opening of negotiations. So is a country a candidate or not? Is a country then ready for the accession negotiations or not? These are eminently political decisions where the Commission makes the proposal and the Council, so all member states, and I have to underline here unanimously, have to take that decision. Then long or not so long negotiation process follows, which is essentially a negotiation not about a deal, but about the transition times in taking over the EU rules. And once that and the Parliament is, let's say, participates in monitoring this process, but when the decision comes then it is a decision which has to be unanimous in the Council, has to be done by clear majority in the Parliament, and I have to add, has to be ratified also in each one of the member states. So it is a process which involves all the institutions, but also our member states beyond the EU institutions, meaning national parliaments. And let me lastly say that the process of negotiation is, of course, done by the Commission. So while the Commission proposes, the Commission also executes the whole process of the specific negotiations in the various areas which are covered by the Treaty of the European Union.
Right. But by the end of the day, it's still, from what you said and from what we know, it still remains a political decision, meaning that each member state has so many opportunities to veto that basically, unless there is a very strong consensus, that's not going to happen. Any state can veto the opening of any chapter or closing of any chapter, and also before that. So there's plenty of opportunities. Somebody is against and wants to use this for the political reasons, as it is now. Currently there are some countries in the EU who are against the idea of the Ukrainians proceeding further on the accession track. So there are too many opportunities to veto. What I'm trying to ask is that, so is it fair to say that by the end of the day, it is really about the kind of geopolitics and the political decisions of the member states, and not much that anyone can do if even one, let's say, neighboring country is against the enlargement?
First of all, I would like to say there's also sometimes a situation that a country with which one has gone through the whole process would vote in its own vote against joining.
Norway.
An unfortunate situation which we have experienced with Norway.
Yeah.
Norway would always be welcome, but decided at the time against, the population decided against joining. So this process, which many people see as a technocratic process among experts, is in fact not a technocratic process only, but is also an eminently political process, as you hint at, where there are significant stakes on both sides. And where there's a political will, there's also a way forward. And since the governments will have to decide about the opening of negotiations, typically the governments, once they would say that the overall balance of the negotiation is good in terms of its outcome, they would propose to their parliaments also the adoption of these of this package. And we have had several successive rounds of enlargement. So here you would, of course, there may be that the one or the other country may be approached by outside of the EU states and say, this is really a bad idea. Georgia has this geographic position, or we have so strong traditional links with Georgia. The same could happen to the Ukraine decision. The same could happen to the Moldova decision. But looking back, we have had quite a number of other countries who were particularly close linked to and are continuously and continue to be geographic neighbors of the country you are hinting at. And it happened. So I think that there are ways to go through this which are correct and also take into account the interests of neighboring states. And we have, of course, many neighboring states. There's not just one to the east. And overall, it can become a situation which is positive for both sides, not only the enlarging EU and the new member, but also for neighbors. And I do not believe that we should look at this process ahead as one which is full of political vetoes, but as a unique opportunity to lead towards a lasting transition and a functioning democracy and market economy in a future member state.
That's one way to look at it, obviously. Let me ask you about the EU as a global actor. There are so many occasions the EU has declared its ambition to be considered to be a global actor, economically, politically, strategically, militarily, even in a way. Can you say that EU, particularly after the war with Ukraine and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, can now be considered to be more a global actor than it was before that? Has this really transformed the perception of the European Union and the strength of the European Union as a global actor?
I think the EU should talk collectively less about being a global actor, because it is a global actor. And the question is whether we are also a geopolitical actor, but that the EU is a global actor, nobody puts really into question when you have a union which constitutes 15% of world GDP. Comparison, China, 18% of world GDP, with purchasing power parity applied. We have a significant voice on everything from climate change to trade to health to biodiversity on global affairs. We are a key economic and financial operator. The questions come always up when it comes to foreign security policy questions, where we have the least degree of integration when compared to other policy areas, which is still to a significant degree a national domain, and where we are deciding in unanimity. I have to say that few people would have expected. Many people were surprised that the EU acted very fast when it comes to Ukraine and with all its means. And it is not NATO which provides the significant number of ammunition and weapons. It is the EU through the European Peace Facility, which finances the purchases of our member states. And this comes on top of what member states do bilaterally and what, of course, other third countries do bilaterally. And nobody would have thought that the EU would be able to do this. It was the EU which took in 4.4 million Ukrainian refugees across Europe. It's the EU which provides more than 10 billion of macrofinancial assistance to Ukraine, and so on. It is the EU which trains 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers and officers this year on our soil for the significant challenges it is confronted with. Now, does this apply, this degree of unity and the capacity to act fast, to all hotspots in the world? Not yet. For this, the history of our member states and sometimes also geographic position plays a hampering role. But we are a multilateral organization. We are a union of 27 sovereign states that will not change. We stand for multilateralism, which means same rules for everyone at home, and we stand for the same internationally. This is a message which the great majority of third countries, the great majority of nation states fully subscribes to, but it does perhaps clash with the ambitions some powers have who try, like in the past, to establish spheres of influence and which ask states to declare their allegiance. I belong to this or I belong to that sphere of influence. This is not the European identity. This is exactly the opposite, because that is how we have led to a period of unprecedented long period of peace and prosperity among our member states. And we hope, of course, to be able as an actor in a multipolar world, which is multilateral, to have our impact for such rules. And I see that there's a lot of demand for that. But we have to be faster, clearer, and capable of using all means. And I think the case of Ukraine is a good case to show that it is possible.
But you said about the multipolar world, but it is increasingly understood that in this multipolar world, you might have the sort of coalescing between China and Russia. This unity, not really a unity, but this kind of alliance in a way, then going against the other powers, EU for that matter, whose values they don't really share. So when we talk about the EU as a global actor, the real question is it able, do you think it's going to be able to resist the changing security environment, not just in Europe, but also in the other parts of the world, where these actors might attempt to change the balance of power, whether it is, for instance, in the Southeast Asia, in the South China Sea, or in other parts, where the reach of the European Union and the West is not that high as it is, for instance, in Ukraine.
Yes, the the only one positive outcome of this Russian aggression against Ukraine, this massive aggression against Ukraine, is that many realize that we are not living in a world of different unconnected regional theaters, but that we are living in a world of global competition, of intensifying global competition. And your question precisely points to that. There has been a long time when people in the European Union said we have to look first and foremost after our neighborhood, Eastern neighborhood, Balkans, Middle East, and North Africa. And that is what the foreign policy has to be, and the foreign security policy. And we have overcome this over the last few years. But the Ukraine war has been an accelerator, and this precisely also because of the, how can I say, no, I use a term which is used by the two actors. Russia and China have agreed on a limitless friendship on the 4th of February of 2022, just 20 days before the invasion started of Ukraine. Limitless friendship, an 11-page long document, which sets out the common ambitions. And that is with a global view. So yes, we have to be very conscious of this and have to take this carefully into account. Even if our bilateral relationship with China is in many ways, in many areas, a cooperative one, that is part of what one could say, part of the systemic rivalry aspect, that there is the wish to systemically change quite a number of things. And for Europe, it has the one requirement: think global and act global. And I'm glad that this has now reached, indeed, this realization. All our capitals, which perhaps due to history and geography had different looks at the world and wanted to limit themselves to those looks. Theaters are interconnected. Similarly, in the US, you see that people who traditionally focused on Asia Pacific and wouldn't know much about Europe or about NATO-related questions suddenly are very much engaged on these questions as well, and vice versa. So you cannot anymore, when you enter into foreign security policy considerations, and I think this applies to everyone, to small and big and wherever you are, you cannot just look at your own neighborhood. You must look beyond that.
So when you look beyond that, so you were in charge of the negotiations on establishing the EU-ASEAN strategic partnership. And so that's one of the examples of looking beyond your neighborhood and looking in Asia. Was the idea of the strategic partnership to, in a way, counter the influence of China in that region and to kind of reassert the role of the European Union, show its presence?
We have many good reasons why we engage strategically with ASEAN, which is the most advanced regional integration organization of the world after the European Union, and is the most dynamic part of the world's economy, and also believes firmly in common rules for all, which are the same. So we have a lot of commonality between us, and they have a higher diversity among their membership than we have. But this is common to us. And I could add to you that we have a very active India policy, that we have a strategic partnership with free trade with Japan, that we have developed an Indo-Pacific strategy of cooperation, which is inclusive and cooperative. So there are many elements, but we also have a China policy, which is very realistic and consists of both partnering and cooperation on the one side, but also realization that competition will get more and more intensive, and that we have elements of systemic rivalry. So in all these areas, I'm glad to say that we have had member states' strong interest, and we have member states' strong engagement in all of this, even with the Pacific Islands. As far as that, we just signed a major new agreement, which covers Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific. And it is that necessity also to bring together all elements, trade and financial policy, with development and humanitarian, but also with foreign and security policy instruments and actions. We have established a coordinated maritime presence between our navies in the Indian Ocean. So yes, there has to be a presence in the region. Does this mean that we want to contain China? We have always said that we want to work with China, cooperate wherever this is in the interest of both sides. But we have to be indeed conscious of the very fast development of China, and there are chances, but there are also some risks which we have to address. We should be not in a defensive mode, but in an engaging mode with China, and you will see this expressed clearly at the upcoming EU-China summit in a few days in early December.
Thank you, Gunnar. Thank you. These are all very interesting answers. But before we finish, I have one more question. I want to go back to the institutions. You mentioned a few minutes ago about the common foreign and security policy and how this is the less integrated of the policies. But is there an argument that could be made that the CFSP and also the foreign policy decision-making is becoming more supranational with the creation of the EAS, with the role of the HRVP, with even the inability of some states who are really against some of the foreign policies to really veto it, de facto to veto it. So if you look at the development of the CFSP in the last 30 years, could one make an argument that it's moving towards supranational as many other policies have moved in the EU?
First, I would like to say that we hope that what exists, which are common positions, included in statements as well, would be subscribed to much more by Georgia, because I understand that we have
I fully agree with you. I subscribe to that.
Yeah. Than 50% of the statements made by the EU are shared by Georgia. This would be a very good expression of the firm wish to join the EU. We have, with the Balkan candidate countries, the majority of them, we have up to 100% subscription. But that is a side remark, but it's in the context of the Georgian drive towards Europe. I think that for me, it was interesting over the last 20 years or so to see that in an area where most people would have thought we would have no way of coming together, significant advances were made in integrating much more. This is interior and justice policy. And there are definitely areas also where we vote with qualified majority, and we have joint actions, joint decisions in many fields, which was under the impact of terror, essentially, and then also under the impact of the migratory pressures. But we are in foreign security policy, it's perhaps the last bastion of national competences. And however, having said this, yes, the EES fulfills a key role by working with the Commission and at the same time with member states and formulating common positions, taking initiatives, but any member state is free to take initiatives. And the requirement of unanimity makes it, of course, less easy to move towards common positions than in areas where we have perhaps not voting, but everybody knows one could go forward without everybody being fully on board. It's the qualified majority areas. And I would certainly consider that as a key area of future reform, because the EU, in the wake of future enlargement, will also have to address a number of reform areas. And I think this is clearly one of them. There are already possibilities under the current treaty. When you have a formal common position accepted at the highest level, then you can implement it with qualified majority, but it's very little used. And we should move probably to a situation like we have it in other policy areas.
Thank you. Thank you, Gunnar, for this interview. You retiring from the EAS is a loss for the EU diplomacy, but joining academia is a gain for Bruges and for the College of Europe and the others. So thanks a lot for this interesting conversation, and good luck in your future endeavors in the academic field now.